Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the recognition. And I want to give high praise to my colleagues on this side of the aisle who have been here this morning talking about the really, really important issues that are facing our country these days. Why are we here in Washington, D.C. on a Saturday? We should be at home in our districts. You know, Republicans believe that the wisdom of the world is not in Washington, D.C. It is back in our districts. It's back with the American people. But we're here because of a failed policy that was passed without bipartisan support, but strictly on behalf of liberals in this body, in the Senate, and the failed policies of a very liberal president. So we wouldn't have to be here today if it weren't for that failed policy. Unfortunately, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are trying to put the blame on us for saying that we're here because we're fighting what we see as a failed policy. The American people see it as a failed policy also. The majority of the American people are opposed to what we have come to call Obamacare. It was not passed by bipartisan vote. Our colleagues keep talking about bipartisanship. It was passed purely on a partisan basis. No Republican has ever voted for Obamacare, and every Republican who has had the opportunity to vote against it has voted against it. Why? Because we believe we represent the American people. We don't want to shut down the federal government. In fact, we've passed bills to keep the government running. We want to have the policy right. My colleague from Connecticut talked about the need for compromise, and he said, erroneously, this is the first time that we would shut down the government over a policy. He must have forgotten that the federal government has shut down 17 times before. Sometimes when Democrats were totally in control, sometimes when there was split government, but it's happened 17 times before. What are we doing here on our side of the aisle? We're fighting for the American people. We know this is a failed policy, and we do not want to see this failed policy go any further than it has gone. And as my colleagues have said, the sad thing about it is our president's willing to negotiate with a country that we call a terrorist country, but is not willing to negotiate. He said, what I haven't been willing to negotiate, what I will not negotiate is on the debt ceiling. He doesn't want to negotiate on Obamacare either. But we know that the president did negotiate in August 2011. We know that five other presidents have negotiated on this issue. We also know that there are going to be people who are not going to be covered by this program that is supposed to be covering all Americans. And Mr. Speaker, with that, I would like to put in to the record an article by Daniel Henniger in the September 25th Wall Street Journal called "Let Obamacare Collapse."
Without objection, so ordered.
Because points out many of the problems with this program that haven't all been pointed out this morning. But we have another issue that we're going to be facing in the next few days, and that is the raising of the debt limit. And I want to quote someone who talked about the failure of leadership if we have to face raising the debt limit. I quote, The fact we're here today to debate raising America's debt limit is a sign of leadership failure. It's a sign the U.S. government can't pay its own bills. It's a sign that we now depend on ongoing financial assistance from foreign countries to finance our government's reckless fiscal policies. Increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Leadership means that the buck stops here. Instead, Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices today onto the backs of our children and grandchildren. America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership. Americans deserve better. That was President Barack Obama on the floor of the U.S. Senate, March 20, 2006. Yes, indeed, Mr. President, we have a failure of leadership, and the buck stops with you. I yield back.
Yields back.